Hey guys, welcome in, welcome in. It's Mr. Gooby. Currently, I am fighting the Ender Dragon, and for the rest of this video, I'll just be doing some in raiding, trying to get Elytra and shulker boxes for in-game. I hope you enjoy the stories. I'll be going over some pretty terrifying Reddit stories. I will say the second one is my favorite, so stick around for that one. But other than that, sit back, relax, grab a snack, and enjoy. Let's get straight into it. All right, this is going to be story one. I quit commercial diving after what I saw at Hoover Dam. Most people think my job is insane. Honestly, they're probably right. When people talk about dangerous professions, they usually mention logging, commercial fishing, or construction. Those jobs earn their reputation. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and you're effed. Or hell, even dead. Me? I always found myself drawn to danger. Maybe it's the adrenaline. Maybe it's because some part of me enjoys standing in places most people will never go willingly. You can learn a lot about a person from the work they choose to do. For me, that work is commercial diving. Most folks hear that and assume it's terrifying. Being dropped into cold, dark water hundreds of feet from the surface while surrounded by machinery that could crush you without any warning doesn't exactly sound appealing to the average person. The funny thing is, I find it relaxing. Down there, the world becomes quiet. The noise of everyday life, the wife complaining, disappears beneath the water. It's just me, my equipment, and whatever job needs doing. I usually have music playing through my helmet while I work on oil rigs, ship hulls, intake structures, and all sorts of underwater machinery. After years in the profession, I thought I'd seen everything in the depths could throw at me. I was wrong. Because in all my years of commercial diving, nothing, and I mean nothing, came close to me making me soil my dive suit the way I almost did during a contract at the Hoover Dam. The water was murky that morning. Visibility couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 feet. My helmet lamp carved a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating clouds of suspended sediment drifting lazily through the reservoir. I remember feeling uneasy almost immediately. Not fear. Fear implies you've identified the threat. What I felt was the discomfort of being observed by something that hadn't revealed itself yet. The sensation settled between my shoulder blades and refused to leave. Something was down there with me. Heavy emphasis on something, because there's nothing in this world that should have been sharing those depths with me. The feeling was irrational, enough that, like an idiot, I ignored it. Then I saw the marks. What the actual hell? They scored the concrete face of the dam in long, jagged trails. These weren't little scratches left by debris or equipment. They stretched several feet across the wall and a bit deep enough into the surface to expose steel beneath. I stopped swimming and stared. What unsettled me most wasn't their size, it was how familiar they looked. Almost human, or at least made by something trying very hard to be. 5 long gouges ran parallel to one another through decades of algae and sediment, climbing vertical along the dam before disappearing into darkness above. I keyed my radio. Oi, somebody's gonna have to explain how these ended up on the wall. The response was laughter. They thought I was joking. Honestly, so did I. I snapped a few photos and continued downward. That's when I found the first handprint. 5 fingers, human proportions, pressed against the concrete nearly 30 feet below the surface. Then another, and another. Soon my lamp was finding them everywhere. Hundreds, thousands maybe. Handprints layered over one another as if something had spent years climbing the face of the Hoover Dam. My breathing quickened. The sound echoed loudly inside my head. There had to be a reasonable explanation. There always had been before. Then my lamp caught movement. A figure, standing motionless on the reservoir floor. I nearly inhaled my own tongue. At first, I assumed it was another diver. The silhouette was roughly human size. 2 arms, two legs, standing upright in the darkness. But that didn't make sense. No diver would be down there alone, not without communications, and not without a support crew, not without lights. This thing had nothing. It simply stood at the edge of visibility, motionless and watching. I blinked. It was gone. Immediately, I radioed the surface. Confirm I'm the only diver in the water. A moment later, the reply came. Just you, Maxwell. No unauthorized personnel. Secondary dive teams. Nobody else in the reservoir. I should have ascended right there. Instead, I kept working. I convinced myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. Fatigue. Bad visibility. Too much coffee before the dive. Stubbornness is a common flaw in my profession. God knows I've got plenty of it. I was raised by a father who thought every problem could be solved by manning up. A strange shadow wasn't about to sabotage my paycheck. A few minutes later, I noticed something that truly frightened me. The safety line connecting me to the surface had gone slack. Completely slack. That should never happen. There are always currents, movement, tension. The line should constantly carry resistance. I turned my lamp toward it. The rope disappeared into the darkness behind me. Then it moved. Not drifted. Moved. Something farther down the line had pulled it. My stomach tightened. Slowly, I followed the rope with my eyes until my beam reached its end. Something was holding it. A hand. A pale human hand emerged from the darkness. Its fingers wrapped around the line. The second hand appeared, and then a face. God, I wish I had seen the face. Its skin was swollen, waterlogged, stretched tight across the features that almost resembled a person. Almost. The eyes were way too large, too dark, like something hauled up from the deepest part of the ocean. Then it smiled. The safety line jerked violently. I screamed into the radio. The thing released the rope and vanished downward with impossible speed. One moment it was there, the next it had been swallowed by darkness. Surface control immediately ordered my ascent. For once in my life, I didn't argue. Halfway to the surface, I made the mistake that still haunts me to my dreams. I looked down. There wasn't just one. Dozens of pale figures stood along the face of the dam, motionless, watching. Their silhouettes clung to the concrete like barnacles that had learned how to imitate people. And every single one of them was staring upward, toward me, toward the surface. I reached the top in record time. The crew blamed nitrogen narcosis, stress, exhaustion. The photographs and film were reviewed. Most showed nothing unusual, just dark water and concrete. Except for one. The final clip from the helmets recorded. The engineers never found an explanation for it. You can clearly see me inspecting the intake structure, and you can clearly see the beam from my HUD lamp, and standing directly behind me is another diver. No safety markings, equipment, or air hose. Just a pale figure staring directly into the camera. The worst part? The timestamp shows the photograph had been taken 6 minutes before I noticed anything in the water, meaning that thing had already been there following me for most of the dive. A few days later, men in black suits came to speak to me. That's about as much as I'm legally allowed to say. I retired shortly after. People think I'm crazy, walking away from a six-figure career because I saw a strange pale figure underneath the water. He must be nuts. Maybe I am. But every time I hear reports about water levels dropping at the Hoover Dam, I find myself wondering what happens when the reservoir finally shrinks enough. Because if those things were standing on the wall 60 feet underwater, sooner or later, they won't be underwater anymore. What the hell were those things? My lord. Are you kidding? This guy has massive nuts on him. Oh my god. Dude, I think I would have just died instantly if I saw that thing. Like he knows there's not supposed to be another diver down there, and he sees something down there and continues to go. Oh no. Oh no, thank you. I would have been gone the first second I saw that guy. Oh my god. All right. This is going to be story 2. I spent 30 minutes listening to someone try to unlock my front door at 3 a.m. Then the police arrived. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, my heart pounding as if someone were trying to punch it from the inside. I was in my small apartment in a relatively quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. One of those old buildings with thin walls where you can hear every move your neighbor makes. But this time, the sound was completely different. It was a faint, muffled creaking sound coming from the main entrance door. It was as if someone were trying hard to turn the key or messing with the lock very quietly, with an expertise that suggested experience. I sat up in bed, terrified, watching the door, my eyes wide in the darkness, listening to the sound of scratching on the door from the outside. It was about 3:30 a.m., and the apartment was a bit cold because I leave the window partially open in the summer. I hear another sound like a slight metallic friction, then everything stopped for a few seconds. Then the sound returned slower this time, as if the person were trying to ensure that no one heard him. I had been living alone for 6 months since my breakup with my ex girlfriend, and I wasn't expecting any visits, especially at this time. I got up quietly, my feet bare on the cold wooden floor, and I walked with hesitant steps towards the door. I grabbed my phone, the battery was low. I thought about calling the police immediately, but what if it was just a drunk neighbor who got on the wrong door? Or maybe stray cats were making the noise? But the sound was very precise and human. I stood behind the door, my breath held and my ear pressed against the wood. I hear a faint sigh from the outside, then a sound like a whisper, as if someone were talking to himself. I hear him say, "Quiet." The words were muffled yet enough to make the hair on my arm stand up. I realized this was no mistake. I looked through the peephole. The hall was completely dark, and I saw nothing but vague shadows. My memories drifted back to stories I hear on Reddit about suburban burglars and thieves targeting single occupancy apartments, waiting until the residents were asleep. I work a routine office job, barely paid the rent, and didn't have any valuables. I asked myself, why would they target my apartment? I started trembling from the fear that was creeping into my bones. I went back to the bedroom with quick steps, grabbed the small kitchen knife I used to chop vegetables, and held it tightly. The phone in my left hand, I tried to open the emergency app. The sound returned again, stronger this time. It was as if the lock were actually moving. I imagined a hand wearing a thin glove. Many questions spun into my head. How long would it take before he succeeded? Minutes? Seconds? I sat on the edge of the bed thinking about escape options. The apartment is on the second floor. The kitchen window overlooks a narrow alley, but jumping might result in a broken leg. I heard light footsteps outside the door, then dead silence. The fear made my heart beat in my ears, and every muscle in my bone was tense. Why me? And why tonight? I was thinking about all the small mistakes I made, like leaving the entrance lamp off, or not installing a security camera as my friend had advised me. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness, and every second carried the possibility that the door would suddenly burst open. After minutes that felt like hours, I decided to call the police. I dialed the number with trembling fingers and whispered into the phone while hiding in the bathroom. The door closed behind me. I told the police officer in a shaking voice, "Someone's trying to enter my apartment." I gave him the address, West Oak Street in the suburbs, and the apartment number. He said they would send a patrol within minutes, but in our area, the response was sometimes slow. especially in the early hours of the morning. I hung up the phone and went back to listening. The sound outside the door suddenly stopped, as if the person has heard me. Then I heard a very light knock on the door, 3 consecutive knocks, as if he were testing if anyone was there. I didn't respond. I started thinking about the worst. Maybe it was not a random thief, but someone who knows me. Was my ex boyfriend trying to scare me? I don't think so, because he lives in another state. Or is it one of the strange neighbors I see sometimes looking at me in a weird way? I hear a sound like friction against the frame, then another faint creak. He was just trying to use another tool, perhaps a scalpel or something to lift the lock. I stepped out the bathroom cautiously, holding the light, and decided to stand behind the sofa in the living room, where I could see the door. The darkness was thick, with only a faint light from the street lamp creeping through the curtains. Suddenly, the outside lights went out completely. My heart stopped for a second. I heard the door shake slightly. I shouted out loud, trying to sound strong, and said, "Who's there?" But my voice came out trembling. I heard no response, just a terrible silence followed by light footsteps moving away slightly, and then returning. I imagined the man outside, perhaps masked, wearing dark clothes, carrying a tool bag. In America, we hear about these incidents daily. Thieves entering and robbing or harming the residents. I remembered a story I read about a woman in California who was killed in her apartment after locks failed to keep the attacker out. Time passed and the police still hadn't arrived. I began to sweat despite the cold, my hands clammy on the knife handle. I had heard the new sound, and it was an attempt to pry the door from the bottom. The wood groaned under the pressure. I approached the door again and looked through the peephole. This time I saw a shadow move quickly and then disappear. There was definitely someone there. I started praying in silence, thinking about my family and how the news of my death would be a shock to them. The next few minutes were the most nightmare scratching sounds, muffled sighs, and the feeling that time was running out. I imagined his hand entering through a small gap, then his whole body. Finally, I heard the sounds of police siren in the streets, blue and red lights shimmering through the curtains. I sighed with relief for a moment and screamed at the top of my lungs, "I'm here! Apartment 2B, he's here!" as I ran toward the door, trying to secure it more. But in those very seconds, the thief clearly heard the sound of the police from the hallway, and instead of running away, he decided to end it quickly. Perhaps he knew the building well, or perhaps he was desperate. I heard a sharp breaking sound, then the security chain snapped and the door flew violently open. The man entered like he was a beast. He was tall and strong, wearing a black mask covering his face except for his eyes. I don't think he was looking to rob. He wanted revenge or control. He attacked immediately and struck me on the head with the handle of a metal tool. I fell onto the floor, and then he kicked me in the stomach. I tried to stab him with a knife, but I missed. I heard the officers rushing up the stairs shouting, "Police! Don't move!" But he had already broken in. In a crazed moment, he lunged toward the living room window, which was partially open, tore through the curtain, and exited into the narrow back alley, the alley leading into the iron fire escape. He was terrifyingly fast, but when the officers reached the apartment seconds later, he disappeared into the darkness behind the building. The neighbors heard the noise, but were afraid to intervene. I now live in a different place. I change my locks every month, and I sleep with the lights on and a handgun by my bed after getting a legal permit. But every night, I wake up to the slightest sound and I wonder, did he know me? Will he come back when he thinks I've forgotten? The police closed the file temporarily, but I know he's still out there somewhere, watching, waiting, and locks are never enough. Oh my god, dude. That's why you own a gun. That is the exact reason why you own a gun. Because in the first place, I guarantee you, if that ever happened to me, breakthrough, whole mag into the chest. Like every single bullet into his face, dude. Oh my, that must have been terrifying, dude. Oh my god, that's scary. That is such a scary situation to be in. Oh my gosh. All right, guys, let's get on to the next one. All right, this is going to be story 3. Black Ridge National Forest. When Elizabeth Stanford disappeared, the entire town stopped breathing. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday in late October. She left her little white house just after sunrise, waving to her elderly neighbor as she always did. She smiled, slung her weather-worn backpack over her shoulder, and told them she'd be back for dinner. She never was. The search lasted 18 days. Volunteers combed over every trail in the woods. Visitors called it Black Ridge National Forest, but to the people who had lived here in the Black Ridge all their lives, to them it was simply the woods. Nothing good ever came saying anything else about that forsaken place. Search dogs followed her scent until it simply ended. Drones flew overhead for hours. Drivers searched the creeks, and every abandoned cabin was checked more than once. The only thing anyone found was her backpack. It sat perfectly upright beneath the roots of an ancient oak tree, untouched by the rain. Inside was her flashlight, a compass, food that had never been opened, dozens of newspaper clippings, and her notebook, with every single page torn out. After months with no answers, the investigation slowly faded away. People moved on. Black Ridge have seen disappearance before. The townspeople almost expected them. The woods stood just outside the town longer than anyone could remember. The oldest maps marked the forest with no name at all, as if even the cartographers wanted nothing to do with it. Hunters avoided it, animals rarely wandered inside, even on the hottest summer days. A cold breeze drifted through the trees. There were stories. Some said the woods were alive. Some believed they were cursed. Others claimed they were much more, much worse, a place that didn't belong in the world at all. Every generation added another warning. Never whistle after sunset. Never count the trees. If you hear footsteps, don't stop walking. If you see someone you know, make sure they didn't see you first. It's not them. Never follow a voice calling your name. Never stray away from the path. And lastly, but most importantly, if the forest suddenly goes quiet, run. Of course, every child in Brackridge grew up hearing those stories. Some of them were scared, and most of them laughed. Elizabeth, however, she never could. When she was 9 years old, her father, James Stafford, disappeared inside those same woods. He was an experienced park ranger. If anyone knew those trails, it was him. He left early one morning after reports of strange lights deep in the forest. He kissed Elizabeth on the forehead, promised they'd go fishing that weekend, and walked out the front door. That was the last time anyone saw him. The search lasted almost a month. Hundreds of people looked. Nothing. No footprints, no torn clothes, not even his ranger's radio. The only thing ever recovered was his old compass. When rescuers opened it up, the needle spun wildly, refusing to point north. Someone said it was broken. Others refused to touch it. Elizabeth kept it anyways. While the rest of the town accepted that her father was gone, Elizabeth never stopped believing that there had to be an explanation. She spent years collecting old newspaper articles, faded photographs, and handwritten journals from the families whose loved ones had disappeared. She interviewed elderly residents who still remember stories passed down from their grandparents. The deeper she looked, the stranger it became. People had been vanishing in the woods for centuries. A hunter in 1821, 3 children in 1894, an entire family during a snowstorm in 1938, a group of campers in 1976. Their stories were always different. The ending never was. No bodies, no answers. Just another missing person. One story appeared again and again, no matter how old the records were. A traveler wandering through the impossible quiet woods. An old leather bound journal with no title. Pages that seemed to know something they shouldn't. Elizabeth dismissed it as folklore. Every legend grows bigger with time. Besides, she wasn't looking for ghost stories. She was looking for her father. For years, she searched the woods whenever she had the chance, mapping trails no one else would walk, and marking strange places no one else seemed to notice. Sometimes she swore the forest looked different than it had the day before. Trees she had marked would disappear. Familiar paths ended where they never had before. She blamed exhaustion, until the day the woods answered back. That's the day she disappeared. People searched for Elizabeth for years. Some believed she'd finally found her father out there. Others believed the hollow woods had simply claimed another soul. The oldest people in Black Ridge never seemed surprised. They only shook their heads quietly and added another story to the long list of names the forest had taken. Funny thing about the stories, people think they end when the last page is written. They don't. Stories grow, they change, they wait. Sometimes they're passed from one generation to the next. Sometimes they're whispered around campfires. And every once in a while, someone who lived the stories decides to tell them themselves. For years, I searched the woods whenever I had chanced. I mapped the trails no one else would walk and marked the trees no one else seemed to notice. Sometimes I'd come back a week later and marks would be gone. Trails I'd walked dozens of times suddenly ended where they never had before. I told myself I was tired, that I was imagining things. I wasn't. I remember that day better than I remember my own birthday. The woods went completely silent. Not quiet, silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even my own footsteps sounded wrong, almost like someone else was walking just behind me. Then I heard my name, Elizabeth. It wasn't a whisper, it wasn't a scream. It sounded like my dad. I should have turned around. Instead, I followed his voice deeper into the woods. The farther I walked, the older everything looked. The trees were massive. Their roots twisted over the ground like they were reaching for something. My compass spun in circles except for my dad's old ranger compass. Somehow it had pointed straight ahead. It led me to a clearing I know wasn't there before. In the middle stood the biggest tree I'd ever seen. Its branches disappeared into the clouds, and its trunk was covered in names. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some looked fresh, others had almost been swallowed by the bark. I started reading them. People I'd seen in old newspaper clippings, people whose missing posters still hung in the diner, people no one had talked to about in decades. Then I saw his. James Stafford, my dad. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't reach out and touch his name. The bark was warm, not from the sun, warm, like a hand. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. It was him. He looked exactly the way I remember him. Same Green Ranger jacket, same boots, same crooked smile. 20 years had passed, but he hadn't changed at all. I wanted to hug him. God, I wanted to. But something wasn't right. He never blinked, not once. You finally found me, he said. His voice sounded just like I remember, but it didn't feel like him. Then more people stepped out from the trees. Some wore clothes I'd never seen in history books. Some looked like they'd just disappeared yesterday. Children, parents, old men, teenagers. Every missing person the woods had ever taken. None of them looked scared. None of them looked trapped. They just watched me, smiling. The exact same smile. I finally understood why nobody is ever found. The woods don't bury people. they keep them. I don't know how long I've been here now. My watch stopped walking days ago, or maybe years ago. I hadn't been hungry. I haven't been tired. The sun never seems to move, but somehow still becomes night. Sometimes I hear church parties calling my name. I try to answer. I swear I do. But every time I open my mouth, nothing comes out. If someone finds this journal, please don't come looking for me. Don't listen if someone you love calls your name. And whatever you do, don't step off the trail. I suppose I should have introduced myself sooner. My name is Elizabeth Stafford. Ooh, that was pretty good. That was a pretty good story. Oh gosh. That's pretty scary. I'm not gonna. Could you imagine just disappearing? Oh man, that must be like a time paradox or something. Wow, that was crazy. Alright, guys, that is gonna be the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure to subscribe and like it, please. I would very, very much appreciate it. And other than that, just make sure to stay safe out there, guys, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.